Okay, hi. Welcome to the Project White Outsiders Q&A. We're rather spectacularly unprepared because we were working so hard on the keynote. But what we're going to do is we're going to step you through not the demo that you saw on stage at the keynote. First of all, could I have some hands up for anyone who hasn't seen the keynote demo? Well, that makes our lives a lot easier. You guys are just going to have to be confused. So we had a version which we showed on stage during the keynote, and that version of the demo was about a week old. Just prior to us coming to the US, or during our visit to the US, there was some work done on the demo to improve the visuals even more. We were a bit worried about stability, so we didn't show that one on stage. We actually used that for the YouTube video, which maybe you have seen. So we're going to show that demo now. The main areas of improvement are actually around that kind of tessellation stuff that we showed on the ground during the demo. So let's just kick it off, Anders.
All right. Are you talking through this, or?
I would go forward and just, so yeah, if we look, maybe, if you go out, Anders, to where the light's hitting the rock there. So you can see there's even more detail in these rocks around the block there. Really, really high level of detail here. Individual pebbles, not bump mapped, all tessellated. And again, that's Megascans. Again, it's the Megascans library that we were using before. So let's just trigger the AI here, Anders.
Yeah. So we did. What's happening now is that the AI, which is just the AI that same AI that we're using for the actual game, it's using nav mesh to walk towards the player.
So this is not scripted at all. These guys are operating under our normal AI code, which is used for gameplay.
And the enemies have sensory systems for sight and hearing, which, depending on the state of the AI, are increased or decreased. So if an enemy is not alerted, they will have a high range of hearing, but a lower range of vision. But once they become alerted to you, they will have a higher range of vision and start chasing you, basically. And always using the nav mesh to navigate towards where the player is.
Maybe just look a little bit closely at this video. It's very dark, though. Maybe could we drop the house lights a little bit? You don't need to look at us. Make the room a bit darker would be nice. No?
What? No? You just call the truth?
Let's move out, because I want to talk about the IK. We didn't talk about this on stage, but there's a full IK solution on the hands of these creatures. So basically, as you guys know, in first-person games, you often want to render the hands separately so they don't intersect with the environment, but we actually want the hands to move in relation to the environment, because this sense of being on all fours and being a non-human creature is really important for selling the kind of core fantasy of the game. So this was actually like 2 or 3 days work from Michael.
So basically how this works is we are rendering the monster is rendered last, and there is a walking or crawling cycle animation, which is just moving the hands. And as each hand is moved forward, we have an animation event which is triggered, where we will do basically a very short raycast down towards the ground. And this is so that we can determine, okay, the animation is not the standard animation is not going to be enough to, for example, if there's a slope. So then we will just move, we will force the hand using IK down towards the position of the ground. And that will give you a subtle but very much more of a natural feeling to being connected to the ground, other than having just a floating animation of the monster moving.
So it's not like a full high-end IK solution. It's more about, and this is a lot of our philosophy, is what do we need to do to sell this idea rather than what do we need to do to get like a completely full technical solution which will satisfy an engineer. We just worked on it for a couple of days to get to the point where you felt grounded and you felt like you were walking on all fours.
And the goal is, of course, further on to have the IK being expanded to, if you move close to a wall, hands can touch the walls and the sides. It's basically using the exact same principle. And they're basically just the three joints, the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder, and that's all we're using. And just doing a raycast, and right now it's only towards the ground, but it can easily be expanded to be anything that is close to the monster.
And we don't really show many steep slopes, but the young creature that we show at this part of the demo, in our prototype, can move on extremely steep surfaces, like greater than 45 degrees. And it's a pretty interesting thing for a first-person game to be able to do that. And so that really helps sell that. You know that shot in the second Lord of the Rings movie where Gollum is crawling down a rock face as they introduce him for the first time? That's kind of the feel that we want, that you're inhuman. Selling that kind of inhumanness is really important because with a first-person game, it's really important because we're not showing what you look like. That's kind of a big deal for us.
There are also obviously there's problems with doing a tessellation, which we're doing close to the camera to make it feel like all of the geometry, or there's a lot of depth to the ground. But if you have enemies that are close to you, they are reacting to the nav mesh only, and it won't be possible for them to. We can't have a geometry that's so complex that the enemies won't be able to. Well, basically, if we had a lot of rubble and stuff, the enemies wouldn't be able to navigate properly. So the nav mesh is just what it is. It's just basically vanilla Unity nav mesh. It's just a plane, more or less, and we just have to sort of live with the fact that you're going to see, you might see like feet intersecting with the geometry if you're really close to the enemy. That's just a trade-off that we have to do.
Let's maybe talk a bit about the rocks as well. Now, neither me or Anders are artists, but we talked a little about the ground solution during the keynote that we're using Quixel stuff for that, and this relief terrain pack. All of the rocks in this environment that we're using to either lie on the ground or to construct the cave walls and cave ceilings are actual scanned rocks. So they're either things that we've bought from other asset libraries which are photogrammetry scanned, or there are things that we have photogrammetry scanned ourselves. Now that's literally just taking an iPhone and getting the geometry. The texture information, because we want to have consistent texturing across all of the rock faces, that is Substance Designer. So it's a material-based system that we used.
One thing to mention about using the mega scans is that if you have scans of natural environments, usually there will be a lot of deviation in colors, and that's why, for example, for all of the cave geometry, we had our artists do the textures for the rocks in Substance Designer instead.
Yep.
And it's mainly because they wanted to have a consistent look.
The other thing we have is that because we're in caves, we don't want any growth of vegetation on those caves that would suggest that, on those rocks that would suggest that they're in sunlight. But the most accessible rocks to us to scan are those that are in sunlight. We don't want to have to find caves and go and do all of our photogrammetry work within a cave. That's kind of hard for us to do. So that's which led us to use basically a material-based solution for doing the texturing and get the geometry from rocks that we find in the street. Some of these huge rocks that we're using to build the rock faces here, the caves, are about this big. So it's kind of fractals in action. You know, you take a rock which is this small and you blow it up, and you can make it look really huge. Maybe we can.
We do the.
You want to just talk quickly about what we're using for particles, Anders?
Yeah, so we're using actually a mix of popcorn effects and just vanilla 5.4 Unity particles. And essentially the reason that we wanted to use, we tried out the third party was because we wanted to do some particles that would be affected by lighting, and which we felt wasn't really possible in 5.4. but we know that there's stuff coming now in Unity. I think it's 5.5, which we will probably migrate to. So our goal is to use as little third party as possible, and use as much vanilla as possible, when possible.
And how do we do the particles from a personnel asset point of view? Very typical of the Outsiders, pretty nimble. We don't have anyone in the team who can do particles. We found a guy called Andreas Glad, who just came off Battlefield 1. He was looking for some work, and we contracted him for a few weeks, and he did all of the particles. So he came off Battlefield 1 single player, it's the same guy, and he did the particles in this. So it just shows you how someone who's come from a AAA engine, like Frostbite, jump in, pick up something from the asset store. He chose Popcorn and just started work, and we got pretty good results. They could, everything can always be better, but we think we got pretty good results with the particles. Should we move on and then talk about the byte? Yeah.
Let's do that.
So the byte, we weren't expecting the byte to be so popular, but looking back on the keynote, people really liked it. Just show it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things happening with the byte. Basically, it starts with the animator who creates 2 animations that are synced up, one for the player and one for the enemy. The enemy is basically just doing an exposed throat thingy, and the player is doing a lock-on camera moving closer to the throat. And after the byte happens, we have a animation that blends into ragdoll. So that's what you see when the enemy flies back. That's animation, and then it blends into the ragdoll, and then you see the enemy falling down to the ground. So a lot of problems with this, particularly because when the animation is made, you can make it look really good when you have in Maya, you know that the enemy is in this position, you know that the player is in this position, and you just do the animation to look as good as it can. But in actual gameplay, you never really know where the player is going to be at, where the enemy is going to be at, what animation the enemy is going to be playing, and what animation the player is going to be playing at that time. So what we need to do is basically do a lot of cheating. So if Ben is the enemy and I am the player going to do the byte, if I'm far away, then we have some code that will suck Ben into my vicinity, and then we will play the animations for the enemy and the player at the same time simultaneously.
Like
so,
this.
It's perfect. And at the same time, if the enemy is too close, we need to push the player away. There are a lot of problems with this with regards to rotation has to be right, and especially if you have an animation tree that doesn't, you need to allow, for example, our enemies, they need to be able to blend very quickly from whatever state they're in to this pose. Otherwise, it's going to look super awkward. So it was a pretty big challenge, I would say, to get this looking decent.
It's worth talking about David's influence, David, our Chief Creative Officer's influence on these kind of processes. Me being the CEO, wanting to do everything as cheaply as possible, I said, well, why don't we do it like Doom, like the recent Doom? If you look at those kind of finisher moves they do, there's always a cut. There's a one-frame edit, and then they translate everything into a position, they play a completely pre-canned animation, and then they just kind of rest the characters in that place. Now, when we showed that to David, he said that's too snappy, it's too unrealistic, it's too action movie, and he wanted something which has a blend in it. So that's how we ended up having to kind of solve all these problems. Another thing I wanted to say is, this is a prototype. This is still a prototype. It might look like a finished game, but we're not even in pre-production yet. So we may find further down the line that there's a different solution to this. Maybe there's some change within Unity that gives us an opportunity, or maybe we figure out another way of doing it. But that's just what we're doing at the moment. We wanted the best solution for getting a good feel for the byte, and that might not be the best solution for the shippable version of that game mechanic, but what we care about right now is the feeling of the game mechanic, and not necessarily like the bits and pieces of getting an absolutely perfect solution. We're okay sometimes if it doesn't quite align, because we wanted to get quickly through this bite mechanic, fix as many of the problems as we can, get it to 75%, and then later down the line we'll work on kind of finishing it.
And it's perfectly okay to not have everything align up perfectly. I mean, the biggest problems we had with the bite was that the player camera would get too close to the enemy and it would clip through and it would look super awkward. But it's basically all about tweaking. So once you get to the state where the player camera doesn't clip through, then it's okay if there's a blend for a few frames from one enemy animation to another. It's gonna feel okay. It's gonna look decent, and it's the entire thing is over in like 20 frames or something. So it's even moving the enemy, because the player is locked, the player camera is locked, looking at the enemy. You won't notice that the enemy is like just sliding towards the player. There's a bunch of all these cheats that you can totally get away with.
Yep. So maybe what we can do now is we'll do the end sequence, the kind of high intensity action sequence, but I'm going to explain what's happening because sometimes you can't see what's happening. So the adolescent creature has the ability to glide like a flying squirrel. So they sprint and run off the edge of the cliff, they glide down towards this Viking encampment. This is not a big encampment, there is like Viking villages as well that you will maybe attack later on. This is like an outpost. There is a guy in that encampment with a torch. We kick him with such ferocity that he becomes decapitated. Now, it's not clear when you see this at speed, but there is a head rolling around somewhere with like meat visible. So we fly in like a flying squirrel, we kick this guy's head off, and this is a game mechanic which you can do over and over again. It's not pre-canned at all. We then turn to the right, and there's two guys standing by a fire. We use the roar ability, which is like a stun ability, to get those guys to deal with those two guys so we don't get crowded. And then we turn to the other side, and there is a more powerful enemy coming at us with a shield and a sword. We can't attack him right away. We have to wait for an opening. So he does a swing, we step to one side, and we bite him. A lot of our combat mechanics are about finding gaps and kind of using space and timing. Dark Souls is a big influence on our game, the combat side of the game. It's kind of a first-person Dark Souls is our goal really with the melee combat, because there's no guns, there's no missile attacks at all in the game at the moment. It's all punches and kicks and grabs and bites and all those kind of things. So see if you can pull it off, shall we?
Yeah. So what's going to happen now in the next 15 seconds is basically I'm going to glide down, I'm going to hit the enemy that I've targeted, and which is in a like idle animation, and it's going to blend straight into the ragdoll, and we're going to apply some force to that ragdoll to push the enemy into the rocks. And the other enemies are going to become alerted to the presence of the player through their sensory systems and start walking towards the player to attack. So yeah, let's see if we can get this to work.
There's motion blur there on the edges of the screen. The head there is directly in front of us. You see rolling away with physics on it.
Oh. Right.
Okay.
So, okay.
It'd be good to open up just for some questions. We've got like 8 minutes left, but again, I want to reiterate where we're at, like I did in the keynote. 3 months ago, I would love to show you some screenshots, but I don't think we don't have anything prepared. This whole environment was completely gray boxed. The creature was gray boxed. The enemies were the enemies from the blacksmith demo that's used over and over. So everything that you see, we had no props. The environment was completely blank. So all of the population of the environment in terms of the building of the structures of the cave, the lighting, the props, the characters coming in, tweaks to animation, the first-person models for the creatures, all of the audio and the particles came in, and we started work on like 1st of August on all of that stuff. And that gives you a sense of how quickly you can operate. We've never got from 0 to that level of visuals in the project before. Usually it takes a year to get that way. And We've done a lot of Unity games before, but they've mostly been lower end, sort of mobile and indie PC products, where you don't really get to that level. But that sense of speed that you get with Unity in the early days, where you're working at low fidelity, that velocity actually continues unexpectedly far, all the way through to hitting kind of AAA visuals. So that was a big learning thing for us, that we actually ended up way overshooting our target visually. We thought we were going to get sort of to about 60–70% of this, and the last 2 weeks, we were just blown away by some of these final polish stuff, particularly the lighting, and doing some work on the terrain there.
I made a slide. You can, if you have any other questions, like if you want to go into any more detail, you can hit me up on Twitter.
Death by Pixel.
Death by Pixel.
No spaces, no.
It's in all caps as well, for some reason. Okay. I don't know why.
We've got about 5 minutes. There's mics here, and over there. Does anyone have any questions for us? If you line up. Yeah, could you, if you go to the mic, because they're videoing it, sorry. Okay, start in August, yeah. Yep.
I was excited when I saw the ground, and I was like, I wonder if that's RTP. Because I also use RTP to make the environments try to look as cool as possible. So I'm curious, I saw you use some elements. Was the atmospheric scattering the same one as in the blacksmith?
Yes, it's the same one.
Okay, because I thought about trying to use that as well.
You can get it on the asset store. And there's also Torbjörn who implemented it. He has a very detailed article about how fantastically complex atmospheric scattering is to implement. So you should check that out. But it's the same one that it's on the blacksmith.
Yeah, so go on, yeah.
The other two things I was wondering about is the use of photogrammetry combined with RTP and those sources you mentioned for getting the good quality kind of rock bumpiness and substance. That's quite a recipe I'll try. So when you did the photogrammetry, do you use Photomodeler? Or what tool? Did you already talk about that? Did I miss that?
No.
We use the Adobe thing, right?
I have no idea, to be honest.
I don't know what the Adobe solution is called. It's in beta. I think we used that.
Okay, so they have a photogrammetry capture tool? I'll try that.
And that was literally the first photogrammetry work that our artist ever did was this stuff.
How do you place it on top of or with the RTP stuff? Do you use anything like Gaia or like one of the like kind of brush tools where you place everything, or how does that like final combination come together?
So it's all RTP and interfacing with the standard Unity terrain stuff. So there's nothing else on top of that that's being.
We just try and find a good match, I guess, between our photogrammetry rocks and the edges, and just find some stuff within Megascans that fits, basically.
But some of the debris has also been placed manually. Like some of the rocks are actual meshes. So it's a combination of both, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if we have everything we used is available to everyone. If we have one advantage, it's that we know a lot of these guys that built like the blacksmith demo. They're located in Sweden, like us. So we kind of are aware of what they were doing and some of the solutions that those guys used. And this is more, another opportunity for us to sort of share some of these techniques with other Unity developers.
Okay, so there's nobody behind me, so I can ask one more. When you build a thing like a cave, usually I've done it with lots and lots and lots of rock prefabs like you were doing, and I end up with like a 250 rock cave, which the player should just look like one cave, but it's kind of inefficient in that form. So with BSPs, you can kind of do like an inverse model where you're modeling the inside of the thing, and then it kind of inside-outs it very efficiently. Is there a workflow for taking all the like rock prefabs or whatever make up your cave and then just to get the inside faces to make it fast?
David did this, didn't he? Quite late on.
Yeah, I honestly don't know.
David's not here. He's too scared of flying.
He's our technical artist.
My understanding is that we roughly modeled some of these larger spaces. The space with the tree, which is one of the points where we kind of were a bit worried about performance because there's a lot of fog and the lighting and stuff. My understanding is that we've roughed that out with these kind of lots of prefabs, and then later, quite late in the process, as a optimization step, we manually by hand basically chopped everything out. Pulled all the back faces off everything and welded it together by hand, I think.
I mean, there's also what we have done is also we used a lot of prefabs, just like you described, for creating the caves, and then basically assembled it in Unity and then exported it back out to an FBX and then into Maya again, and then we got the mesh from there and then back into Unity. So that's also an option. But feel free to hit me up on Twitter, and then I can hook you up with David, who's our technical artist, who can give you more details.
One more question? Yeah, go for it.
I have a quick question. I missed the first couple minutes, so I'm not sure if you had briefly touched on this, but I was wondering a little bit about the lighting, just regarding kind of what your theory was on how to optimize it and make it look good, as far as like baked lighting versus real time and distance between baked and real time and distance between shadows and stuff like that. Can you summarize what you did for that?
So yeah, lighting. Basically, we're doing baked. We're doing a combo of baked and real time, and the biggest performance bottleneck is if you have, well, at least from what we saw, is we have in the two scenes we have in the first scene we have a very low sun, and then we have a very high sun for the inside. And the longer the shadows are, the more of a performance bottleneck you're going to hit. So that's essentially one of the biggest pain points that we had.
We're using a volume to switch between these two sun positions, and we had this frame rate spike, which we didn't understand why it was happening, and it was because we couldn't see the sun position during that particular cave that we were going through, and that was as we went from shorter to longer shadows, basically. Yeah. Anything else about lighting?
Pain to bake.
It's really good. I was talking to Clive from Unity as we were doing the run-throughs this morning, and I feel like what's good about using Unity, I don't know whether you guys agree with me, is the things that frustrate you get fixed straight away. It's not like there are problems that people are like, when is this ever going to get sorted out? It's like we're frustrated. You get frustrated with the light map baking, and they just say, well, okay, we're going to fix that. So that was kind of fun for us to see. All of the things this morning in the keynote were a lot of the things that we were like, well, they were the particular pain points that we had with 5.4. Yeah. Any other questions from you? No? Anyone else? We've only got like 30 seconds left officially. We might be able to stretch it out a little bit. Nope. Oh.
You mentioned something about actually exporting FBXs back out of Unity.
Yeah.
What package did you use, or what tool did you use to do that?
Good question. I think there used to be a semi-official Unity FBX export thing. I don't remember if that's what we used or we ended up modifying it, but there's definitely one of the packages that we're using that's on the asset store.
Well, yeah, and that touches a little bit on our philosophy. You have no idea how much asset store stuff we have used during this prototyping phase. I'm keeping track of receipts as the CEO. There must be 60 to 100 purchases on the asset store, from pigs to spiders to full AI solutions to particle packages, whether it was fire or blood that we used early on. There was just, and this is why Anders can't remember, because we use so much asset store stuff. As far as we're concerned, the first port of call before we implement anything is to look on the asset store, see if someone else has done it already, then we just use it, particularly in this prototyping phase, and then we'll figure out if we need to write our own thing later. But we're about getting to that feeling of playing the game as early as possible, and we just want to get there as fast as possible. And we'd never really done this in previous Unity projects, but this time we were like, let's just go to town because we've got a limited budget. Let's just use as much asset store stuff as we possibly can. So in that sense, even though we're a relatively big team and it's a fairly high-end thing, we're operating very much like a lot of you guys maybe if it's just one or two people who are really relying on asset store a lot. That gets us to stretch from a 7 to 8 person team to what feels like a 15 to 20 person team, rather than what a lot of people do is, I guess, the feeling of going from 1 to 2 people to 5 to 10 people. Thank you. He's it.